Hi, I'm Mikaela Balkind, and I spent my 6 weeks at the University of California, Santa Barbara. So I was in the Songs Lab, and this lab was funded by MSI, Marine Science Institute. It wasn't funded by the school. And my advisor was Bob Miller, and I worked with an undergraduate, Stephanie Patton. And the interesting thing about my lab was there's 3 different projects going on. The lab was split into 2 different sections, and on the other side, they were studying beach hoppers and beach rack. And then within my lab, there was these 2 guys, Justin and Rusty, and they were studying a marsh restoration project down in San Diego. So they were looking at photos all the time. So I kind of got to figure out what other projects were going on besides my own. And so my project, I was working with Stephanie, and she was an REU. So she was doing research experiments for undergrads. So she was from Chicago, and she was new to the Santa Barbara area, just like myself. And my lab's main focus was kelp forests and figuring out how trophic levels and invertebrates all work within them. So my project, we cultivated phytoplankton with carbon-13. And carbon-13 is, it's rare. Most of the atmosphere is made up of carbon-12. Carbon-13 is a little bit heavier because it has one more neutron than carbon-12. And so it's really easy to test for because it doesn't naturally occur that often. So these were our buckets of phytoplankton that we cultivated with carbon-13. And you can see the clean one. I had to clean a lot of those. Lots of scrubbing. So these are the buckets that we would feed to our invertebrates after we were done cultivating them. And this was Stephanie counting how many molecules per milliliter we had. And we had to do that so that we made sure we had a consistent amount of carbon-13 per molecule of, or milliliter of phytoplankton. And we kept them on these, the original samples on these swish tables because we wanted to keep our phytoplankton happy. And if they were sitting still, then it wouldn't be like their natural habitat like the ocean and the natural tide. So then the organisms. We had 100 Stiella, which is the top, 100 mussels, and 80 scallops, because scallops are rare and they're a little bit harder to find where we were. And each week we'd take out 10 Stiella and 10 mussels and 8 scallops from our dump buckets, and those are the things that we would dissect. These are the dump buckets that we kept them in, and you can see the water system above with the salt water coming in. It dumps into the buckets that there's like a natural ocean tide flow so that we can keep our organisms happy and the water doesn't overheat. And here you can see the lab. This is actually the campus of UCSB. It's super gorgeous. And then the feeding tanks. And so I would have to take these giant buckets of phytoplankton from the lab down to the feeding tanks on these carts. And I'd be walking down the sidewalk. And of course, there was a surf camp there the whole time with a bunch of guys. And I was walking down the sidewalk with a big bucket of phytoplankton trying to get off the curb. So you can kind of see our mussels and scallops and Stiella and where we kept them and the dump buckets in action. And I don't know if you can tell with phytoplankton and without after we're done dumping it in. And then we would collect them and dissect them for 3 different types of tissues. In the scallops and mussels, we collected a mantle, a muscle, and a gut contents. And for the Stiella, bronchial basket, gut contents, and muscle. And the muscle for the scallop is what you guys are probably used to eating. And then after dissecting them, we'd put them in a drying oven, leave them for 24 hours, and come back, and we'd grind them. And the thing about the lab is we had 2 separate drying ovens, one for carbon-12 and one for carbon-13, so that our samples wouldn't cross-contaminate. And this was the grinding part. It was super tedious. We had to dump it in these little containers, and you couldn't touch any part of the container or the sample because you didn't want to contaminate it with oils from your hand. And afterwards, we'd have to triple wash it with deionized water and clean them super well. So that was pretty much my experience there. They got the test results back a couple weeks after I did it, so I'm not really sure what the outcome was yet because they're still going through all the data. But some of the stuff that I took away from the lab is I got a really good understanding of primary producers in the kelp forest area and why they're so important. I also got to learn basic lab knowledge, like what DI water was. And I also got some really cool tidbits about each person's profession and why they were so passionate about it and how come they showed up to work every day and weren't just like, another day at the office. They really loved their work. And then one of the highlights of my trip was I got to go to the Channel Islands and went to Santa Cruz, which is where Daniela went, I think. But I spent 4 nights at the research station there. It's off the coast of Ventura. And I was with my advisor and his lab, or his class, so a bunch of undergraduate kids from Santa Barbara. And this is the crew. We're all pretty sunburned after the trip, pretty tired. So these are some of the pictures that I took of organisms that lived on the island. And we got to go to a bunch of really untouched places, like this mussel bed. It's protected by the Nature Conservancy, so we were super lucky to get to go down there and hang out and do a bunch of studies on the beach hoppers and the hermit crabs and the pies-ester starfish and all the endangered species that are still living there. This is Christie's Beach. We set up beach rack and tested for what type of animals, or rather beach hoppers, that would come and hang out in our artificial beach rack. So one of the pictures from there. And we got to go on a bunch of cool hikes, climb down the beach bluffs. And a little bit of cliff jumping. Yeah. Mom, you didn't see that. And once again, the crew of undergraduates and a couple people from my lab. So things that I took away from the whole experience. You're not going to like all your roommates. My first couple roommates were older graduate guys, a little bit goofy. One of them wore snow boots around the apartment in the middle of summer. And so, you kind of had to roll with it, and I ended up moving in with a really nice graduate girl, and that kind of changed the whole experience for the better. And I had to ask questions. I was out there by myself, and your parents aren't there to hold your hand, to buy you groceries, and to find you new roommates. And sometimes you will be washing buckets. You're not going to have the respect of your PhD advisor when you first get to a lab. So you have to be okay with that. And one really important thing that I learned is Southern California is probably not for me. I was pretty set on going there for college, and I kind of learned that, not everybody really surfs down there. They don't go to the beach every day, and I miss the mountains, so it was good to learn. Big thanks to Pinhead and the Songs Lab. I had a really awesome summer.